Apart from emperors, the only other group for which porphyry was used to make statues in ancient Rome was a group of war prisoners. Dacian prisoners, to be more precise. Porphyry is a beautiful and rare rock whose color is purple, the color of royalty. Its use was monopolized by the emperors of Rome, and only they were allowed to use it. Why would the most powerful empire of the time build expensive statues for war prisoners as if they were royalty?
Învingerea dacilor a fost o miză importantă pentru Imperiul Roman, aflat sub conducerea lui Traian la maxima sa extindere teritorială. Dacii erau nu numai foarte bogați și buni de jefuit, ci și luptători de temut, cel mai puternic adversar al Romei în acel moment. Probabil că aceste lucruri, dar și altele, l-au determinat pe Traian ca la puțină vreme după victorie să facă câteva lucruri fără precedent în istoria Imperiului. Astfel, în anul 113, la Roma este ridicată celebra columnă care poartă numele cel mai impresionant monument artistic al antichității. Cu o înălțime de 30 de metri, un diametru de aproape 4 metri și o suprafață desfășurată a basoreliefurilor de 204 metri, columna ilustrează povestea războaielor daco-romane cu o impresionantă artă și atenție pentru detalii. Copii ale uimitorului monument se găsesc astăzi în multe muzee ale lumii, inclusiv în București. Cel mai de necrezut lucru făcut de Traian este însă ceea ce expertul în istoria artei, Leonard Velcescu, numește programul iconografic dedicat dacilor de către romani. În lucrarea sa Daci în sculptura romană, studiu de iconografie antică, Leonard Velcescu identifică peste 100 de statui de daci aflate la început în forul lui Traian, astăzi prezente în diverse muzee ale lumii. Este evident că niciun alt popor învins de Roma nu a beneficiat de o atenție atât de mare din partea artiștilor plastici romani. De ce oare romanii le-au ridicat învinșilor statui de până la 3 metri înălțime în atitudini pline de demnitate? Pentru că niciuna dintre aceste statui nu îi pune pe daci în poziții umilitoare. Ele exprimă forță și mândrie, iar multe dintre acestea sunt mai mari decât orice statuie păstrată cu împăratul Traian. Una dintre explicațiile logice pe care le putem avea ar fi aceea că Traian și romanii au admirat vitejia unui neam care, potrivit doctrinei zamroxiene, se credea nemuritor și lupta cu neînfricare. Motivele sunt însă cu siguranță mai multe.
The bravest and the most righteous of the Thracians, as Herodotus called them, the Dacians, called Geti by the Greeks, were a group of Thracian tribes located mainly in today's Romania, Moldova, Bulgaria, Serbia and Hungary, but also stretching as far away as Poland, where the Dacian city of Sătri-Dava, today called Konin, was located. Many of the largest modern European cities such as Budapest and Sofia were originally Dacian citadels. As we have shown already, the Thracians north and south of the Danube, the Dacians, were the ancestors of the Romans, and the Romans themselves acknowledged this. Hesychius of Alexandria says that their name derives from the Phrygian word Daios, meaning wolf. The Dacian city of Daiostava in Moesia, today's Serbia, means the city of the wolves. The wolf, the only animal of the region which cannot be tamed, was the symbol of the Dacians. After the Roman Empire occupied the southern part of Dacia, south of the Danube, the Dacian stronghold became the territory of today's Romania, where their capital Sarmizegetusa was located. This land was the richest in ancient Europe and had everything that ancient civilizations needed to prosper: wood, iron, gold, silver, oil, salt, fertile lands and clean fresh water, etc. Throughout history, Romania has been occupied and robbed of its resources by all major empires. For example, at the end of the 18th century, so after the robbery of South America, it was estimated that 47% of the gold of Europe was taken throughout the ages from Transylvania, Romania. Museums of Vienna, for example, are filled with Dacian gold stolen by the Habsburg Empire. Even today, the people that control the European Union are doing their best to keep Romania at bay in order to get their hands on its oil, gas, wood, gold, silver, crystals, a long list of extremely rare earths used in industry, and so on. The riches that Dacia had were the Roman Empire's main motivation to conquer the region, coupled with the prolonged financial crisis that threatened the empire's very existence. The Dacian capital Sarmizegetusa was a large city covering an entire mountain. Most of it is still underground and has not been researched. This is how the religious and spiritual center, destroyed by the Romans, looks like today.
And some recent archaeological discoveries have revealed just how important. Most of this extraordinary complex of buildings was only uncovered in the 1950s. Their precise function remains a mystery, but it seems certain that this was a sacred site. What was here? Unlike any Roman temple, this site has no altar for sacrifices and no statue of a god.
Pythagoras says that the Dacians had the best laws and lifestyle and were the best at understanding the world around them in his time. The Roman writer Cassiodorus, the Greek philosopher Diochrysostomos and the Goth historian Jordanes also say that the Geti were always superior to the barbarians. Herodotus says that they believed in the immortality of the soul, which made them fearless in combat. From Julian's work, The Caesars, we find a similar description of the Dacian belief system. They believed that they do not die but they only change their location. Thus a Dacian custom that is still practiced today in some parts of Romania, was to cry at births and to rejoice at deaths. Another Dacian practice that is extensively used in Romania today was the use of medicinal plants. The Greek doctor Dioscorides copied a list of Dacian medicinal plants that shows just how much knowledge they had accumulated. At Sarmizegetusa a doctor's kit was found that contained all kinds of medicines such as ashes from Mediterranean volcanoes, used as absorbent for wounds. A Dacian skull that had trepanation marks shows that the Dacians had good surgeons as well. All these medical practices were guided by the teachings of Zalmoxis.
În dialogul Carmides, Platon amintește sau consemnează o discuție între Socrate și Carmide, în care Socrate spune cum a învățat în perioada cât era în armată, cât era la oaste, a cunoscut un medic trac și povestește ce anume l-a învățat medicul trac. El spune așa, spunea medicul tracul acesta, că medicii greci aveau dreptate să cuvânteze așa cum v-am arătat adineauri. Dar Zalmoxis, spunea el, regele nostru, care este un zeu, ne spune că după cum nu trebuie încerca să îngrijim ochii fără să ținem seama de cap, nici capul nu poate fi îngrijit neținându-se seama de corp. Tot astfel trebuie să-i dăm îngrijire trupului dinpreună cu sufletul și iată pentru ce medicii greci nu se pricep la cele mai multe boli. Și anume, pentru că ei nu cunosc întregul pe care l-au de îngrijit. Dacă acest întreg este bolnav, partea nu poate fi sănătoasă, căci, zicea medicul, toate lucrurile bune și rele pentru corp și pentru om în întregul său vin de la suflet și de acolo curg ca dintr-un izvor, ca de la cap la ochi. Trebuie deci, mai ales și în primul rând, să tămăduim izvorul răului ca să se poată bucura de sănătate capul și tot restul trupului. Prietene, zicea el, sufletul se vindecă cu descântece. Aceste descântece sunt vorbele frumoase care fac să se nască în suflete înțelepciunea.
The only forms of writing we have from that period are text fragments written using the Greek and the Roman alphabet, as well as all kinds of mysterious runic scripts similar to the Gothic one. The Goth historian Jordanes says the Dacians wrote down their laws, but because of the lack of surviving texts, historians are divided with regards to the Dacians having their own writing style. The solar calendar at Sarmizegetusa was probably used in agriculture. Wine, honey and cheese, for example, some of the most appreciated traditional products in Romania, were also produced extensively by the Dacians. All kinds of Dacian agricultural tools, such as plows, confirm that, as we have seen before, the area north and south of the Danube was also the biggest producer of cereals of the ancient Europe. They were also extracting salt, iron, gold and other metals, and were collecting surface oil. Glass and ceramics production were also important in the Dacian culture. Evidence shows that they were using the potter's wheels since the 5th century BC. But by far the most advanced craft developed by the Dacians was metallurgy. The biggest workshops of ancient Europe were located here, and the Dacians were recognized for their skill. The Dacians' gold artifacts, for example, are truly spectacular. The Roman poet Horatius completes our picture of the Dacian civilization. Nowhere do you find mothers that love their children more. Here you don't find women who are arrogant because of the riches they possess and proud of their adulteries or of the husbands turned their slaves. The most beautiful fortune here is considered the honesty of the father, the virtue of the mother and the fidelity of the wife. It is thus no wonder that Trajan, Galerius and the other Roman emperors were so proud of their Thracian descent. When compared to the Greek and Roman civilizations of the time, it becomes clear why the Dacian prisoners are portrayed as royalty in Rome.
In almost all cultures prior to Christianity, the killing of babies, known as infanticide, was a common practice. According to researchers Susan Scrimshaw and James Dennis, it was the norm in Greco-Roman culture. In ancient cultures, male babies were more prized than female ones, so in Greece, for example, it was rare for even a wealthy family to raise more than one daughter. Indeed, an ancient inscription at Delphi in Greece states that in the 2nd century, only 1% of families there raised more than one daughter. Disabled babies were simply seen as subhuman and were drowned. Babies that weren't killed in Greco-Roman culture were often just abandoned. Euripides, the Greek poet from 5 BC, mentions infants being thrown into rivers and manure piles, exposed on roadsides and left for prey to birds and wild animals. Greek and Roman literature is full of stories of abandoned children, and in Sparta, when any child was born, it had to be taken before the tribal elders, who would then decide whether the child should be kept or simply thrown away. It was Christians like Clement of Alexandria and Tertullian who led the campaign against these atrocities. Indeed, Christians didn't just protest against these practices, but were also willing to go the extra mile and proactively set about caring for abandoned children by establishing orphanages, foster homes and drop-off points at churches. This was revolutionary stuff at the time. Callistus was known for finding homes for abandoned children, and Benegus of Dijon provided protection and nourishment for children, some of whom were deformed by failed abortions. This effort changed worldviews and eventually led to the outlawing of child abandonment. It was also Christians that changed attitudes towards abortion, which was again very prevalent in Greco-Roman culture. Respect and honour for marriage became completely extinct in Roman culture, and chaste women were said by Juvenal to be non-existent. As they slept around, they inevitably became pregnant, and as they became pregnant, they inevitably needed to dispose of the evidence of their unfaithfulness. This meant abortion rates went through the roof. Human life was cheap and expendable in those days. Philosophers like Plato, Aristotle and Celsus, and others well after Christ, had no compunctions about taking the life of an unborn child. It was Christians that stood against the culture of the day to unequivocally condemn it. The Christian Athenagoras wrote to the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius to express his outrage at the practice. Adult life was cheap and expendable to the Greeks and Romans too. Gladiatorial shows where humans killed and were killed for entertainment was the norm. Each contest required men to fight men and often animals too. The barbaric cruelty, the agonizing screams of the victims and the flow of human blood stirred no conscience in the crowd who cheered and bayed for more slaughter. Christians were appalled by this gambling with human life and boycotted and condemned it. This too brought them into conflict with the pagan Romans. Minucius Felix cites a Roman pagan who strongly criticized Christians for their anti-gladiatorial stance, saying, "You do not go to our shows, you take no part in our processions, you shrink in horror from our sacred gladiatorial games." The Romans hated these Christians who wouldn't join in and go with the cultural flow. Eventually, as Jerome Carcipino says, the butcheries of the arena were stopped at the command of Christian emperors. For similar reasons as those described previously, it was Christians who changed attitudes towards suicide, which was seen as honourable and romantic in Roman and some Asian cultures amongst others. It was also Christians who opposed and ended the acceptance and practice of paedophilia, which was a cultural norm in Greco-Roman society. In fact, so ingrained was this practice into their culture that even the emperors had these abhorrent relationships. Emperor Nero had at least 2 boys called Sporus and Pythagoras, and Sporus was sickeningly castrated so that he could assume the role of wife for Nero. Nero's successor was a man called Galba, and he had at least 1 male lover. Emperor Hadrian had a young boy called Antonius, and Emperor Commodus, along with his 300 concubines, also had 300 young boys on staff to satisfy his sexual appetite. It was Christians who first changed attitudes to women. Apart from the regular killing of baby girls, women in general were deprived of basic freedoms in Greco-Roman times.